How's it going, everyone? In today's video, I wanted to talk about something which I found to be quite interesting. As an experienced Python developer, you will know that the correct way to check that an object is none is by performing an identity check on the object using the is keyword. And this is incredibly useful for when you're checking whether an object contains a value or not before you try to use it. For example, here we could have an optional, which I will call user-selected, and this will be of type string or none, which will initially be set to none. So this might contain a user. If the user selected is none, this means that no user was selected. Else, we can print that the user selected was the representation of the user selected. So here we continue with the logic that uses the user. Right now, if we were to run this, we'd end up with no user selected. But if we clicked on Bob and selected Bob, you'd notice that the user selected will be set to Bob. In one of my previous videos, I got a comment asking me, why do we use is to check for none and not is equals to? And I realized that up until today, I blindly followed the docs on this one, and I was unable to answer that without doing a bit of research first. I knew it was considered a good practice and that it was a PEP 8 standard, and also that none was a singleton, meaning that it will always have the same ID or memory address across the lifetime of a script. And all of that pointed towards is making sense. But I still could not answer why that meant we couldn't use is equals to. So now it's finally time we explore the reasons why we cannot or should not use is equals to when checking for none. But before we dive into today's video, I'd just like to thank Zed for sponsoring the channel. I've been using the Zed code editor for a while now, and I really enjoy it. If you feel like trying out Zed, I've left a link in the description box down below where you can download it for free. Anyway, let's get back to the video. The main reason we do not use is equals to check for none is because of a potential bug we can encounter in Python. Every class has the ability to choose how it handles is equals to, and some implementations can break the none check. For example, suppose you have a simple class that represents a user, and all this user contains is a username and a role. Next, imagine that this user class implements its own comparison logic. For every object we compare a user to, we're going to return true. And this is an oversimplification, but we'll make the point quite clear in just a moment. Below, let's create an instance of this user, and this will be an optional. And again, we're going to check whether there's a user selected, and if there isn't, we're going to print that there's no user selected. Otherwise, we will print the current user that was selected. Note that we're using is equals to check for none. Right now, if we were to run this, we'd get no user selected, which is quite strange because here we selected Bob, who is an admin. And if we change this to none, we'll get the same result, which unfortunately could give us a false positive, because if we started by checking for none, we'd think that this function worked just fine. But it wouldn't be until later, when we actually ran the code with a valid user, that we'd find out the terrible truth. The custom implementation that we wrote for is equals to will be the one used here to check for none, and that will cause a major bug in all our code. And again, this was an oversimplified example, but it makes the point quite clear. Do not rely on is equals to check for none, because any class can modify the behavior of is equals to. Always use is for consistent none checking. And you'll notice immediately, if we change this to is, that the program will work just fine, whether we pass in Bob or none. Another reason you shouldn't use is equals to check for none is performance. Is more performant than is equals to, since is equals to requires extra lookup logic. I'm not saying that you should do it for the optimization, but because it's the right thing to do, and is the right tool for the job according to PEP 8. Personally, I never considered what could go wrong if I used is equals to instead of is to check for none until today. My rule of thumb is to always follow what's considered a good practice relatively blindly. at least until you have the energy to research it and dive into it. Anyway, just to recap, you shouldn't use is equals to check for none because it's the wrong tool for the job. None is a singleton and should be treated as such. It avoids potential bugs caused by classes that implement their own comparison logic. Is more performant than is equals to. And finally, it's a PEP 8 standard, and we love following standards. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do let me know in the comment section down below whether you learned something new or have something to add. But otherwise, with all that being said, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.